A 15-year-old boy from Millbrook, Ohio, suddenly locked himself in his bedroom and refused to come out, leaving his parents with growing concern and unanswered questions for 3 agonizing days. But when they finally forced their way inside, they discovered something pinned to his wall that would expose a truth far more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. Sarah Chen Rodriguez pressed her ear against the bedroom door for the 20th time that morning, straining to hear any sound from within. The silence was deafening. Behind the white-painted wood, her 15-year-old son Marcus had barricaded himself for 3 days now, and she was running out of patience and sanity. "Marcus, honey, please," she called softly, her voice hoarse from repeating the same please. "Just tell me you're okay. You don't have to come out, just let me know you're alive in there." Nothing. David Rodriguez emerged from the kitchen carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee, his dark eyes rimmed with exhaustion. At 42, he prided himself on being the kind of father who could handle any crisis, but this situation had him completely stumped. He handed Sarah her mug and wrapped his free arm around her shoulders. "Any change?" he asked, though he already knew the answer from the defeated slope of her posture. Sarah shook her head, accepting the warmth of both the coffee and his embrace. "I heard the floorboards creak about an hour ago, so I know he's moving around, but he won't answer me. Won't even acknowledge that I'm here." They stood together in the hallway of their modest 2-story home, staring at the door that had become a barrier between them and their son. The house felt wrong without Marcus's presence. No sound of his video games echoing from upstairs, no arguments about doing homework, no requests for rides to friends' houses, just an oppressive quiet that seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour. "Did you try texting him again?" David asked. "Every hour. He's not responding to texts, calls, nothing. His phone is definitely in there with him because I can hear it buzzing sometimes, but—" Sarah trailed off, taking a shaky sip of her coffee. David set his mug on the small hallway table and approached the door. He knocked firmly but not aggressively. They'd learned that aggressive knocking only made Marcus retreat further. "Marcus, it's Dad. I'm not angry, okay, but you're scaring your mum and me. We just need to know what's going on. Did something happen at school? Did someone hurt you?" The silence stretched on. "Are you sick? Did you get into some kind of trouble?" David's voice grew more strained. "Son, we can work through whatever this is, but you have to talk to us." A floorboard creaked, definitely movement, but still no response. Sarah joined her husband at the door. "Marcus, I called the school. They said you've been attending all your classes, your grades are fine. Mrs. Patterson said you seemed quiet in English on Friday, but otherwise normal. So what changed over the weekend? What happened?" They waited, hoping desperately for any kind of response. Sarah found herself studying the door as if it might reveal secrets. The small dent near the bottom, from when Marcus had kicked a soccer ball in the hallway years ago. The height marks they'd penciled in when he was younger, now painted over. This door had never been a barrier before. Marcus had always been an open kid, sometimes frustratingly so. "I'm starting to think we need to call someone," David whispered to Sarah. "Dr. Martinez, maybe, or I don't want to traumatize him," Sarah whispered back. "What if this is just teenage stuff? What if we break down the door and it turns out he's just embarrassed about something normal?" 3 days isn't normal, Sarah. This isn't teenage angst. They'd been having variations of this conversation since Sunday evening, when Marcus had first retreated to his room after dinner. At first, they'd assumed he was just tired or had homework to catch up on. Monday morning, when he hadn't come down for breakfast, Sarah had knocked and received a muffled, "I'm not feeling well," through the door. She'd left soup and crackers outside his room, which had disappeared by Tuesday morning. But Tuesday brought no improvement. Marcus had refused to come out for meals, wouldn't answer direct questions, and seemed to be surviving on the snacks and water bottles Sarah left by his door. By Wednesday morning, today, both parents were fighting panic. "Maybe we should call his friends," Sarah suggested. "See if something happened that we don't know about." "I tried that yesterday, remember? Jake said Marcus seemed fine on Friday at lunch, and Tyler hasn't seen him since last weekend." Sarah rubbed her temples where a tension headache was building. "I keep trying to think if there were warning signs. He's been quieter lately, more distracted. But I thought it was just the usual sophomore year stress." "When did you first notice him being different?" Sarah considered this carefully. "Maybe 3 weeks ago. He started spending more time on his computer, but not gaming. He was always researching something. Reading articles, taking notes. I figured it was for a school project. Did you ask him about it? I tried, but you know how he gets when he's focused on something. Just grunted and said it was school stuff. Sarah felt a stab of guilt. Maybe I should have pushed harder. David squeezed her hand. We can't blame ourselves for giving him space to be independent. That's what good parents do. A sudden thud from inside the room made them both freeze. It sounded like something heavy had fallen or been thrown. Marcus, Sarah called urgently. Are you okay? What was that? No response, but they could hear movement now. Footsteps pacing back and forth across the room. That's it, David said, his voice firm with decision. I'm calling Dr. Martinez. This has gone on long enough. Wait, Sarah grabbed his arm. Give me 5 more minutes. Let me try one more time. She pressed both palms against the door, as if she could physically push her love through the wood to reach her son. Marcus, baby, I need you to listen to me. I don't know what's happening, but I need you to know that there is nothing, absolutely nothing, that you could have done or that could have happened to you that would make us love you any less. If you're in trouble, we'll help you. If someone hurt you, we'll protect you. If you made a mistake, we'll figure it out together. Her voice cracked with emotion. But I can't help you if I don't know what's wrong. And keeping us locked out is just making everything scarier for all of us. A long moment passed. Then, so quietly they almost missed it, came Marcus's voice, rough as if he hadn't used it in days. You won't believe me. Sarah's heart leaped. David moved closer to the door. Try us, David said gently. We've always believed you before. Another long pause. It's not something I did wrong, Marcus said, his voice slightly stronger now. It's something I found out. And if I'm right, Mom, people could get hurt. People are already hurt. Sarah and David exchanged alarmed glances. What do you mean? Sarah asked carefully. I can't. Marcus's voice became muffled, as if he'd moved away from the door. I need more time to make sure, to organize everything properly. If I'm wrong, then I've just been paranoid and stupid. But if I'm right, Marcus, David said firmly, whatever you think you've discovered, you don't have to handle it alone. That's what parents are for. You'll think I'm crazy. You'll think I've been watching too many crime shows or reading too many conspiracy theories online. Try us, Sarah repeated her husband's words. We promise to listen with open minds. They waited, holding their breath. Finally, Marcus spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. I think someone in town is taking people, and I think I know who it is. The words hit Sarah and David like a physical blow. They stared at each other in shock, trying to process what their son had just told them. Taking people, David asked carefully. What do you mean, taking people? The missing persons cases, they're not random. They're not runaways or accidents. Someone is choosing them, and everyone keeps ignoring it because Marcus's voice broke slightly. Because no one wants to believe it could happen here. Sarah felt the hallway spin slightly around her. Marcus, honey, what missing persons cases? Emma Chen from my old middle school. She didn't run away like everyone said. And Derek Phillips, the college kid from State who disappeared last spring. And Mrs. Kowalski's nephew who was visiting from Cleveland. Marcus was speaking faster now, as if a dam had burst. There are patterns, Mom. Times, places, types of people. I have it all mapped out. David's law enforcement training kicked in. He'd worked as a security consultant for the county sheriff's office for years before starting his own business. Son, if you really believe you've uncovered evidence of crimes, we need to take this to the police. I tried, Marcus's voice cracked with frustration. I called the tip line 3 weeks ago. They said they'd look into it, but nothing happened. And then I realized why. Why? Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. A long silence. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was hollow with fear. Because I think it's someone who would have access to those tip line calls. The implications of that statement settled over Sarah and David like a heavy blanket. If Marcus was right, if he'd actually uncovered evidence of multiple disappearances and believed law enforcement might be compromised, then their 15-year-old son had been carrying an enormous and dangerous burden completely alone. Marcus, Sarah said softly, will you please open the door? We need to see what you've found. We need to help you figure out what to do next. I'm scared, Marcus admitted, his voice breaking completely now. I'm scared that if I'm right, then showing anyone makes it real. And I'm scared that if I show you, you'll be in danger too." David's throat tightened with emotion at his son's words. Even in his fear and isolation, Marcus was trying to protect them. "Son, we're already in this with you now. The moment you told us, we became part of it. So let us help. Let us see what you've discovered, and let's figure out the safest way to handle it together." They heard movement inside the room, footsteps approaching the door, then retreating, then approaching again. Marcus was clearly wrestling with his decision. "If I show you," Marcus said finally, "you have to promise me something." "What?" Sarah asked. "Promise me that we won't just dismiss it, that you won't just say I'm being paranoid or watching too much TV. Because I've been careful, Mom. I've been so careful to only include things I could verify. And if you see it and still don't believe me," his voice became very small, "I don't know what I'll do." Sarah's heart broke for her son. She could hear the weight he'd been carrying, the isolation he'd felt, the fear that the people he trusted most wouldn't trust him in return. "We promise," she said firmly. "We promise to look at whatever you found with open minds and to take you seriously. And we promise," David added, "that whatever we find in there, we'll face it together as a family." A few more moments of silence. Then they heard the sound they'd been waiting 3 days for, the click of the lock turning. The door opened slowly, revealing Marcus for the first time in 72 hours. Sarah gasped at the sight of her son. His usually neat brown hair was disheveled, his clothes wrinkled from sleeping in them. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and he'd clearly lost weight. But it was the expression on his face that broke her heart, the look of someone far too young, carrying far too heavy a burden. "Hi," Marcus said quietly, stepping back to let them into his room. Sarah wanted to hug him, to hold him tight, and promise that everything would be okay. But as her eyes adjusted to the dim light in his room, her attention was caught by something that made her forget everything else. The wall above Marcus's desk was covered, completely covered, with papers, photographs, newspaper clippings, maps and strings connecting various elements, like something out of a detective show. But this wasn't fiction. This was real, detailed, and far more extensive than anything she could have imagined her 15-year-old son putting together. David stepped fully into the room, his expression shifting from parental concern to professional interest as he took in the scope of what Marcus had created. "My God," Sarah whispered. "Marcus, how long have you been working on this?" 3 months, Marcus said, his voice barely audible. "Ever since Emma Chen's case was officially closed as a runaway." As Sarah moved closer to examine the wall, she realized that what she was looking at wasn't the work of a paranoid teenager with too much time on his hands. It was methodical, detailed, and terrifyingly convincing. And if Marcus was right about what it revealed, their quiet town of Millbrook, Ohio, was hiding a secret that would shatter everything they thought they knew about their community. Sarah stared at the wall in stunned silence, trying to process the sheer scope of what her son had assembled. The investigation board stretched across the entire width of Marcus's bedroom wall, a complex web of connections that looked like something from a federal task force, not a teenager's bedroom. In the center hung a large map of Ohio with red pins marking locations throughout the state. Colored strings connected the pins to photographs, school pictures, driver's license photos, social media screenshots of at least 15 different people. Below each photo were index cards covered in Marcus's careful handwriting, documenting dates, locations, circumstances, and what appeared to be extensive research notes. "Jesus," David breathed, his security consultant experience helping him recognize the professional quality of the organization. "Marcus, where did you get all this information?" Marcus moved to stand beside his parents, suddenly looking younger than his 15 years, despite the mature nature of his work. Newspaper archives mostly, online missing person databases, social media accounts before they got taken down or went private, some stuff from the library's microfiche collection. Sarah reached toward one of the photographs, a smiling teenage girl with dark hair similar to her own. "This is Emma Chen." "Yeah. She was in 8th grade when I was in 7th at Millbrook Middle. Everyone said she ran away because she'd been having problems at home, but..." Marcus pulled down a folder thick with printed documents. "I found her journal entries that she posted on her blog before she disappeared. She wasn't planning to run away. She was excited about starting high school. She'd just made the JV soccer team." David studied the timeline Marcus had created below Emma's photo. It says here she disappeared on March 15th, 2019. That's almost 8 months ago. Right, and look at Derek Phillips. Marcus pointed to another photo, a young man in a college sweatshirt. He disappeared April 3rd of this year, 19 days later. That's not necessarily a pattern, David said carefully, though Sarah could see he was taking this seriously. 2 people disappearing within a few weeks could be coincidence. It could be, Marcus agreed, but look at Mrs. Kowalski's nephew, Tommy. He indicated a third photo. He disappeared June 8th, 2 months and 5 days after Derek. And then Sarah Martinez, she's not from here, but she was visiting her aunt in Millbrook, July 12th. Another month and 4 days. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she began to see what Marcus was getting at. The intervals are getting shorter. Exactly. And that's not even the scary part. Marcus pulled down another set of documents. Look at the locations where they were last seen. He'd created a detailed map of Millbrook and the surrounding area, with each disappearance marked by a different colored pin. Sarah traced the pattern with her finger and felt her breath catch. They're all within a 5-mile radius of downtown, she said. All of them, Marcus confirmed, and they all happened on weekends. All of them were last seen alone, but in public places where someone could have easily approached them without it seeming suspicious. David was studying the photographs more closely now. Marcus, these people, they don't really look alike. Different ages, different ethnicities, different builds. Usually predators have a type. That's what I thought too at first. But then I realized they do have something in common. Marcus pulled out another set of notes. They were all new to the area or visiting. Emma had just moved here from California 6 months before she disappeared. Derek was a college student who'd only been in Ohio for 2 years. Tommy was visiting from Cleveland. Sarah Martinez was here visiting family for the summer. Sarah felt her mouth go dry. So they were all people who wouldn't have established routines, people whose disappearances might not be noticed immediately, or people without deep local connections who might be looking into their disappearances, Marcus added quietly. The implications were chilling. Sarah sank onto Marcus's desk chair, staring at the wall of evidence her son had assembled. Marcus, this is incredible work. Terrifying but incredible. How did you even think to connect these cases? Marcus sat on the edge of his bed, suddenly looking exhausted. Emma's disappearance bothered me from the beginning. Everyone was so quick to accept that she'd run away, but I knew her a little from school. She wasn't the type, and her family was really torn up about it. It didn't make sense that she'd just leave without saying anything to anyone. So you started researching on your own, David said. At first I was just trying to find something that might help her family. Maybe find evidence that she really had planned to leave so they could have some peace. But the more I dug, the more things didn't add up. And then Derek Phillips disappeared and I noticed some similarities. Sarah studied the timeline more carefully. Marcus, you said you called the police tip line 3 weeks ago. What made you think law enforcement might be involved? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with whether to share this part. Finally, he reached for another folder, this one hidden behind the others. There's something else, he said quietly. Something that made me realize I needed to be really careful about who I talked to. He pulled out a printed email exchange and handed it to his parents. Sarah read it aloud. I have information about several missing persons cases in the Millbrook area that may be connected. I believe there's a pattern that hasn't been recognized. Can someone please contact me to discuss this? Sent to the county sheriff's tip line. She looked at the response. Thank you for your concern. We will look into your information and contact you if we need additional details. All missing persons cases are thoroughly investigated. That seems like a normal response, David said. Keep reading, Marcus said grimly. Sarah continued. I sent additional details about the pattern I noticed, including dates, locations, and similarities between cases. I haven't heard back, and I'm concerned these cases aren't being treated as connected. Please advise. And then, she paused, reading the final response. We appreciate citizen concern, but please be aware that spreading unsubstantiated theories about local cases can be harmful to ongoing investigations and families involved. We recommend focusing on your studies rather than law enforcement matters. David frowned. That's dismissive. It's more than dismissive, Marcus said. I sent that follow-up email with specific details about the timing patterns and geographic clustering. If they'd actually looked at what I was showing them, they would have at least asked questions. Instead, they basically told me to mind my own business. Sarah felt a chill of understanding. So you started wondering if there was a reason they didn't want to look too closely, or if someone who had access to those tip-line reports was making sure they didn't get taken seriously, Marcus said quietly. David was studying the wall again, his expression growing more serious. Marcus, you mentioned earlier that you think you know who might be responsible. What led you to a specific person? Marcus hesitated, then walked to the far end of his investigation board. There, partially hidden behind other documents, was a section Sarah hadn't noticed before. At the center was a photograph of a man in a sheriff's uniform. Deputy Chief Nathan Morrison, Marcus said quietly. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Nathan Morrison had been a fixture in Millbrook for as long as she could remember. He'd been David's supervisor years ago when David worked for the sheriff's office. He coached Little League Baseball, organized the annual 4th of July parade, and was widely respected throughout the community. Marcus, David said carefully, that's a very serious accusation. What evidence do you have? Marcus pulled down another set of documents. Morrison was the responding officer to Emma's initial missing person report. He was also the one who classified her case as a runaway after just 2 days of investigation. He was the lead investigator on Derek Phillips's case, and he was the one who told the media that Derek had probably gotten lost hiking and fallen in the woods. That could still be coincidence, Sarah said, though her voice lacked conviction. Maybe. But look at this. Marcus showed them a printed social media screenshot. This is from Derek's Facebook page, posted 2 days before he disappeared. He was asking if anyone knew about good places to hike near Millbrook. Look at the responses. Sarah read through the comments. Several people had suggested various trails and parks in the area, but one comment stood out. Millbrook Falls Trail is great for a peaceful hike, very secluded. I'd be happy to show you the trailhead if you're interested. N. Morrison. Morrison reached out to Derek personally, David said, his voice tight. And Derek responded? Marcus pointed to the next comment. That would be great, thanks. I'll send you a private message. Derek's family told the police he'd gone hiking alone, Sarah said, understanding dawning on her. But if Morrison had contacted him, then Morrison knew exactly where Derek was planning to go, and Derek's family would have no idea Morrison was involved, Marcus finished. David was studying the social media exchange more closely. Marcus, how did you find this? Derek's Facebook page would have been taken down or made private after he disappeared. I screenshot everything as soon as I started noticing patterns, Marcus said. I was worried information might disappear, and it did. Derek's page went private about a week after I found this exchange. Sarah felt sick. Marcus, if you're right about this, if Deputy Chief Morrison really is involved in these disappearances, do you realize how much danger you might be in? That's why I locked myself in here, Marcus said simply. I needed time to think about what to do. If I go to the sheriff's office, Morrison will know. If I try to contact other law enforcement agencies, there's a chance the information gets back to him through normal channels. And if he finds out that someone has figured out what he's doing, he didn't need to finish the sentence. They all understood the implications. David ran his hands through his hair, clearly struggling with the magnitude of what Marcus had uncovered. Son, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Is there any chance at all that you might be seeing patterns that aren't really there? That your desire to help Emma's family might have led you to connect things that are actually unrelated? Marcus looked hurt by the question, but he considered it seriously. I've wondered about that, he admitted. That's why I've been so careful to only include things I could verify. That's why I kept working on it for 3 months instead of going public immediately. And that's why I was trying to find more evidence before I told anyone else. He gestured to another section of the wall. I've been tracking Morrison's work schedule against the dates of the disappearances. He was on duty for all of them. I've been monitoring his social media and public appearances. There are gaps in his documented activities that correspond to the timeframes when these people went missing. Sarah stared at her son, amazed and terrified by the thoroughness of his investigation. Marcus, this is incredible work, but it's also incredibly dangerous work for a 15-year-old to be doing alone. I know, Marcus said quietly, but who else was going to do it? Everyone else just accepted the official explanations. Emma's family moved back to California because they couldn't stand the rumors that she'd run away. Derek's parents are still waiting for his body to be found in the woods somewhere. Tommy's aunt feels guilty because she thinks he left town because he didn't like visiting here. His voice cracked with emotion. These families deserve to know the truth, and if there's going to be another disappearance, if the pattern continues, someone else is going to get hurt. David sat down heavily on Marcus's bed. If you're right about the timeline getting shorter, the next one should happen within the next few weeks, Marcus said grimly. Maybe sooner. Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. We have to do something. We can't just sit on this information. But what? David asked. If Morrison really is involved, going through normal channels could be disastrous. And if Marcus is wrong, then we've falsely accused a respected law enforcement officer of serial kidnapping and probably murder, Marcus finished. I know. That's why I needed more time to be sure. Sarah stood up and began pacing Marcus's small room. There has to be someone we can trust, someone outside the local system who could look at this objectively. What about the FBI? Marcus suggested. Don't they handle serial crimes that cross jurisdictions? David considered this. They do, but they usually need to be invited in by local law enforcement, or there needs to be clear evidence of federal crimes. And even then, the initial contact would likely go through the sheriff's office, Sarah finished, where Morrison would hear about it. They sat in silence for a moment, each contemplating the impossible situation Marcus had uncovered. Finally, David spoke. There might be another option, he said slowly. When I worked for the sheriff's office, I had contacts with the state police. There's a detective I knew who specialized in cold cases and missing persons. She might be willing to look at this unofficially. Can you trust her? Marcus asked. I think so. Detective Sarah Walsh. She left the county about 5 years ago because she felt the local system wasn't thorough enough in investigating certain types of cases. If anyone would take this seriously and handle it carefully, it would be her. Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. You think she'd meet with us? I think she'd at least listen. Especially if I explain that we have a minor who may have uncovered evidence of serious crimes, and we're concerned about his safety. Marcus looked between his parents. So we're really doing this? We're really going to try to expose Morrison? We're going to try to get justice for Emma and Derek and the others, Sarah corrected, and we're going to try to prevent anyone else from getting hurt. But Marcus, she turned to face her son directly. From this moment on, you don't do any more investigating on your own. We handle this together as a family, and we involve professionals who can keep you safe. Marcus nodded, and for the first time in days, Sarah saw relief in his expression. He was no longer carrying this burden alone. There's one more thing, Marcus said quietly, reaching for a final folder. I've been monitoring social media and local online forums, trying to see if anyone else has noticed anything unusual. He handed them a printed screenshot from a local Facebook group. This was posted yesterday. Sarah read the post aloud. Has anyone seen my daughter? Maya Rodriguez, 16, was supposed to meet friends at the mall on Saturday but never showed up. She's not answering her phone and this isn't like her. Please share. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The pattern, David said grimly. It's continuing. Marcus nodded, his face pale. Maya Rodriguez disappeared 2 days ago. If Morrison is following the same timeline, then we're already too late to prevent this one, Sarah finished. But maybe we're not too late to save her. David was already reaching for his phone. I'm calling Detective Walsh now. This can't wait any longer. As her husband dialed, Sarah looked at the wall of evidence her son had assembled and felt a mixture of pride and terror. Marcus had uncovered what might be the most important criminal investigation in their town's history. But in doing so, he'd also made himself a target. She put her arm around Marcus's shoulders, pulling him close. We're going to figure this out, she whispered. We're going to stop him, and we're going to keep you safe. Marcus leaned into his mother's embrace, finally allowing himself to be 15 years old again, instead of a lone investigator carrying the weight of multiple disappearances. But as David began speaking quietly into his phone, trying to reach Detective Walsh, they all knew that the most dangerous part of this investigation was just beginning. Detective Sarah Walsh arrived at the Rodriguez home at 7:30 a.m. the next morning, exactly 12 hours after David's phone call. She was a tall woman in her early 40s, with graying brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and sharp green eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Sarah had met her briefly years ago at a law enforcement barbecue, but seeing her now in their living room, she understood why David had trusted her with their impossible situation. "I want to be clear about something before we start," Detective Walsh said, settling into their couch with a large coffee and a notebook. "I'm here in an unofficial capacity. I can't promise that anything we discuss will lead to formal action, and I can't guarantee anyone's safety if we're dealing with what you've described. But I can promise that I'll listen with an open mind and help you figure out the safest way to proceed." Marcus sat between his parents on the opposite couch, his evidence folders stacked neatly on the coffee table. He'd barely slept, but his eyes were alert and focused. This was his chance to convince a professional that his months of work weren't the paranoid fantasies of an overactive teenager. "Start from the beginning," Detective Walsh said. "David told me you've been investigating disappearances in the area. Walk me through how this started." Marcus took a deep breath and began with Emma Chen, her background, the circumstances of her disappearance, and why the official runaway explanation had never sat right with him. Detective Walsh listened without interruption, occasionally making notes, her expression neutral but attentive. When Marcus moved on to Derek Phillips, she leaned forward slightly. "You said Morrison reached out to Derek on social media?" she asked. "Yes, I have screenshots." Marcus handed her the printed Facebook exchange. Derek asked about hiking spots, and Morrison offered to show him the Millbrook Falls Trail personally. Detective Walsh studied the screenshots carefully. "Did Derek's family mention this contact when they reported him missing?" "No. According to the police report, they said Derek had gone hiking alone. But look at this." Marcus pulled out another document. "I found Derek's phone records through a public information request. There were 3 calls between Derek's phone and a number registered to Nathan Morrison in the 2 days before Derek disappeared." Sarah watched Detective Walsh's eyebrows rise slightly. "You filed a public information request?" Marcus nodded. "I used the Freedom of Information Act. It took 6 weeks to get the records, but they show a pattern of communication between Morrison and several of the missing people before they disappeared." "Several?" Detective Walsh's voice sharpened. Marcus spread out phone records across the coffee table. Tommy Kowalski received 2 calls from Morrison's personal number the day before he disappeared. The official report says Tommy decided to leave town early because he wasn't enjoying his visit, but his aunt never mentioned any contact with law enforcement. "And Sarah Martinez?" Detective Walsh asked, studying the timeline Marcus had created. 3 text messages from Morrison's number in the week before she disappeared. I couldn't get the content of the texts, but the timing is there. Detective Walsh was quiet for a long moment, studying the documents Marcus had assembled. Finally, she looked up at David and Sarah. "I need to ask some difficult questions," she said. "Marcus, I'm impressed by the thoroughness of your research, but I need to understand your methodology. How did you decide which cases to include? How did you rule out coincidence?" Marcus had clearly been prepared for this question. "I started with every missing person report filed in the county over the past 2 years. That was 23 cases total. I eliminated anyone who was found within 72 hours, anyone with a documented history of running away, and anyone whose disappearance could be clearly explained by accident or suicide." He pulled out a larger folder. "That left 11 cases. Of those 11, 7 showed the patterns I've documented: geographic clustering, weekend disappearances, recent arrival in the area, and some form of contact with Morrison in the days before they vanished." "What about the other 4?" Detective Walsh asked. 2 were elderly people with dementia who wandered away from care facilities, clearly different circumstances. 1 was a domestic violence situation where the woman disappeared after her boyfriend was arrested, and she was found safe in another state. The 4th was a homeless man whose body was found in the river 3 months later. The coroner ruled it an accidental drowning. Detective Walsh nodded approvingly. "So you eliminated cases that didn't fit the pattern, rather than forcing unrelated cases to fit?" "Exactly. I was looking for genuine connections, not trying to prove a theory I'd already decided on." Sarah felt a surge of pride in her son's methodical approach, even as the conversation continued to terrify her. "Let's talk about Maya Rodriguez," Detective Walsh said, consulting her notes. "You said she disappeared following the same pattern?" Marcus's expression grew grim. "Saturday afternoon, supposed to meet friends at the mall but never showed up. 16 years old, family moved here from Texas 8 months ago, and yesterday, Her mother mentioned on Facebook that Maya had been asking about part-time jobs around town. "Why is that significant?" Sarah asked. "Because Morrison runs the county's youth employment program," Marcus explained. "He helps local teenagers find summer jobs and internships. Maya would have had legitimate reasons to contact him, and he would have had legitimate reasons to meet with her." Detective Walsh was taking rapid notes now. "Have you been able to confirm any contact between Morrison and Maya?" "Not yet. Her family isn't posting details online. They're just asking people to share her picture and call the police if they see her. But if the pattern holds, there should be phone records or social media contact," Detective Walsh finished. "Right. And if Morrison is following his usual timeline, Maya has been missing for less than 48 hours. If she's still alive, the implication hung in the air." Detective Walsh closed her notebook and leaned back, clearly processing everything she'd heard. "Marcus," she said finally, "assuming for a moment that your theory is correct, that Deputy Chief Morrison is responsible for these disappearances, what do you think happened to these people? Are we talking about kidnapping, human trafficking, murder?" Marcus had clearly wrestled with this question. "I don't know," he admitted. "None of the bodies have been found, which could mean they're being held somewhere, or it could mean he's gotten very good at disposal. The geographic clustering suggests he has a specific location where he takes them, probably somewhere isolated. Have you tried to identify potential locations?" "I've been working on it. Morrison owns property outside town, a cabin near Millbrook Falls where he takes people hiking. He also has access to county facilities that might provide privacy, but I haven't been able to get close enough to investigate without risking exposure." Detective Walsh turned to David and Sarah. "What made you decide to call me instead of going directly to the FBI or state police through official channels?" David answered carefully. "Morrison has been with the department for 15 years. He has connections throughout local law enforcement and probably some state contacts as well. If we went through normal channels, there's a good chance he'd be notified about the investigation before anything could be done to protect potential victims or preserve evidence. And if Marcus is wrong," Sarah added, "we didn't want to destroy an innocent man's career and reputation without being absolutely certain." Detective Walsh nodded. "Those are both valid concerns. Let me ask you this. Have any of you noticed anything unusual about Morrison's behavior recently? Any changes in routine, signs of stress, anything that might suggest he knows he's under scrutiny?" "I don't have much contact with him anymore," David said. "But I saw him at the grocery store last week and he seemed normal. Asked about my business. Mentioned he was planning to take some time off soon to do work on his cabin." Marcus looked alarmed. "When?" "He said something about taking a long weekend soon." "Why?" "Because if he knows someone might be investigating him, he might be planning to destroy evidence. Or," Marcus's voice dropped, "if he has Maya, he might be planning to relocate her or—" "We need to move quickly," Detective Walsh said, standing up. "Marcus, I need you to give me copies of everything you've compiled. Every document, every timeline, every piece of evidence. Can you do that today?" "Already done." Marcus handed her a thick manila envelope. "That's a complete copy of everything, organized chronologically. There's also a digital copy on this flash drive." Detective Walsh accepted the materials with obvious respect for Marcus's preparation. "I'm going to review all of this today and make some discreet inquiries. I have contacts who can help me verify some of your findings without alerting anyone in the local department." "What should we do?" Sarah asked. "Nothing different from your normal routine. Don't give Morrison any reason to think you're suspicious of him. Don't discuss this with anyone outside this room. And Marcus," she looked directly at him, "no more independent investigating. What you've done is remarkable, but from this point forward it's too dangerous." Marcus nodded reluctantly. "I'll call you tomorrow morning with an update," Detective Walsh continued. "If Morrison really is planning to take time off soon, we may need to act within the next day or two." After Detective Walsh left, the Rodriguez family sat in their living room, each lost in their own thoughts. The weight of what they'd set in motion was beginning to sink in. "Do you think she believed us?" Marcus asked quietly. "I think she's taking it seriously," David replied, "which is more than we could have hoped for." Sarah was staring out the window, watching their quiet neighborhood street. Everything looked so normal. Kids riding bikes, neighbors walking dogs, the mail carrier making his rounds. It was hard to believe that somewhere in this peaceful community, a predator might be holding a 16-year-old girl captive. I keep thinking about Maya's parents, she said. They must be going crazy with worry. If we're right about this, we might be able to bring her home, Marcus said. We might be able to bring all of them home. And if we're wrong? Sarah asked. Then we've wasted Detective Walsh's time and probably ruined Morrison's life, David said grimly. But Marcus, looking at everything you've put together, I don't think we're wrong. Marcus pulled out his laptop and opened a document he'd been working on. I've been trying to map out possible locations where Morrison might be keeping people. Based on the timeline of the disappearances and his known schedule, he would need somewhere private, accessible, but not so remote that he couldn't check on it regularly. He showed them a map of the area surrounding Millbrook, with several locations marked in red. His cabin is the most obvious possibility, but it might be too obvious. There's also an old mining facility about 20 miles north that's been abandoned for years. Morrison would know about it from his law enforcement work, and there are several county maintenance buildings that he would have access to. Sarah studied the map, trying not to think too hard about what they might find at any of these locations. How do we narrow it down? We don't, David said firmly. That's Detective Walsh's job now. Our job is to stay safe and let the professionals handle it. But even as he said it, Sarah could see the frustration in Marcus's eyes. He'd been the sole investigator on this case for 3 months. Handing it over to someone else, even someone qualified, went against every instinct he'd developed. Marcus, she said gently, I know this is hard, but what you've accomplished is incredible. You've potentially saved lives and brought justice to families who thought they'd never get answers. That's more than most adults accomplish in their entire careers. Marcus nodded, but Sarah could see he was still processing the magnitude of what they'd uncovered. For 3 months it had been his secret, his investigation, his burden. Now it belonged to the world, with all the uncertainty and danger that entailed. That afternoon, as they tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy, Sarah found herself jumping at every phone ring, every car that slowed down in front of their house, every unexpected sound. The knowledge that Morrison might be aware of their suspicions made every moment feel potentially dangerous. At dinner, Marcus barely touched his food. What if Detective Walsh can't find enough evidence to act? He asked. What if Maya dies while we're waiting for official procedures? Then we'll have done everything we could within the system, David said. Marcus, I know it's frustrating, but vigilante justice isn't justice. It's chaos, and chaos gets innocent people hurt. But Maya's best chance is Detective Walsh and whatever resources she can bring to bear, Sarah interrupted gently. Your investigation gave her a starting point that could save Maya's life. That's not nothing. That's everything. That night, as Sarah lay in bed listening to the normal sounds of their neighborhood, she wondered if they'd made the right choice. They'd trusted their son's investigation enough to involve law enforcement, but what if they were too late? What if Morrison was already covering his tracks? And what if he somehow discovered that Marcus was the one who'd figured out his pattern? She pulled the covers tighter around herself and tried not to think about how easily a respected law enforcement officer could make a problem family disappear, especially if he felt cornered. Tomorrow, Detective Walsh would call with an update. Tomorrow they might know whether Marcus's months of careful investigation would lead to justice or tragedy. But tonight, all they could do was wait and hope that somewhere in the darkness, Maya Rodriguez was still alive. Detective Walsh's call came at 6:15 a.m., jolting Sarah from an uneasy sleep. David answered on the second ring, his voice instantly alert despite the early hour. We need to meet, Detective Walsh said without preamble, but not at your house. Can you be at Riverside Park in 30 minutes? Come alone, just you, not Sarah or Marcus. David's expression grew tense. What's happened? I'll explain when I see you. Park at the far end near the old pavilion. And David, make sure you're not followed. The line went dead. David stared at the phone, his mind racing through the implications of Detective Walsh's urgent tone and cryptic instructions. What is it? Sarah asked, sitting up in bed. She wants to meet at the park in 30 minutes. Alone. David was already reaching for his clothes. Something's happened. Sarah felt ice in her veins. Should we wake Marcus? Not yet. Let me find out what we're dealing with first. 25 minutes later, David pulled into the empty parking lot at Riverside Park. The morning fog hung low over the river, giving the familiar landscape an ominous quality. Detective Walsh's unmarked sedan was already there, parked under a cluster of oak trees. She got out as David approached, and he could see immediately that she was operating on very little sleep. Her usually neat appearance was disheveled, and there was a tension in her posture that suggested significant developments. "Thanks for coming quickly," she said, glancing around the empty park. "We need to talk, and we need to do it somewhere we can't be overheard." They walked toward the old stone pavilion that had been built by the town's founding families decades ago. Detective Walsh waited until they were seated on one of the weathered benches before speaking. "Marcus was right," she said without preamble, "about all of it." David felt his stomach drop. Part of him had been hoping they were wrong, that his son's investigation was the product of an overactive imagination rather than a terrifying reality. "I spent yesterday making discreet inquiries through contacts at the state level," Detective Walsh continued. "Phone records, financial records, property searches, employment histories. Morrison's pattern goes back further than Marcus realized." She pulled out a manila folder. "I found 3 additional cases from surrounding counties that fit the profile, all officially closed as runaways or accidents, all involving people new to their respective areas, all with documented contact with Morrison in the days before they disappeared." "Jesus," David breathed. "It gets worse. I had a contact run Morrison's financials. He's been making cash deposits to his personal accounts that don't match his salary or any documented income source. Small amounts, irregular timing, but consistent over the past 3 years." David stared at her, trying to process the implications. "You think he's selling them?" "I think he's trafficking them. The cash deposits correspond roughly to the timeline of disappearances. And I found something else. Morrison has been using county resources to run background checks on young people who've recently moved to the area. Kids like Emma Chen, Derek Phillips, Maya Rodriguez. He's been hunting them systematically. That's exactly what he's been doing, and David..." Detective Walsh's expression grew even more grave. "I think he knows someone's onto him." David felt his blood turn to ice. "What do you mean?" "I made my inquiries as discreetly as possible, but some information requests leave digital footprints. If Morrison has contacts who monitor certain databases, and given his position, he probably does, he might have been alerted to someone investigating him. Are we in danger? I don't know, but we need to move fast and we need to be very careful. I've been in contact with the FBI's trafficking unit. They're sending a team, but it'll be at least 6 hours before they arrive. In the meantime, I need to know if you've noticed anything unusual around your house, any changes in your neighborhood, anyone who might be watching your family." David thought back over the past 24 hours. "Nothing obvious, but I wasn't specifically looking for surveillance. Start looking now, and David, I need you and your family to consider relocating temporarily. If Morrison realizes that Marcus is the one who uncovered his operation..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. A man who had been abducting and trafficking people for years wouldn't hesitate to eliminate a teenage witness and his family. "There's something else," Detective Walsh said, pulling out another document. "I was able to get access to Morrison's work schedule and cross-reference it with his personal vehicle's license plate scanner data. He's been making regular trips to a location about 40 miles north of here, an area that's mostly abandoned industrial buildings and old mining facilities. You think that's where he's keeping them? It's our best lead. The FBI team will coordinate a search of the area when they arrive. But David, if Maya Rodriguez is there, and if Morrison realizes he's been compromised, he might kill her to eliminate evidence," David finished grimly, "or move her somewhere we'll never find her. That's why we need to act quickly, but also why we need to be extremely careful not to spook him." David's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and felt his heart stop. "Detective Walsh," he said quietly, showing her the screen. The message was from an unknown number. "Your son is very smart, too smart for his own good. If you want your family to stay safe, you'll convince him to stop asking questions about things that don't concern him." Detective Walsh swore under her breath. He knows. Morrison knows about Marcus. David was already dialing Sarah's number, his hands shaking slightly. The phone rang 4 times before she answered. "David, what's..." "Pack a bag for you and Marcus, right now. Don't ask questions, just do it. I'll be home in 10 minutes. "David, you're scaring me." "Good, be scared. Be ready to leave the house the moment I get there." He hung up and turned to Detective Walsh. "What now?" "Now we get your family somewhere safe and accelerate our timeline. I'm calling the FBI team and requesting immediate deployment. We can't wait 6 hours." As they hurried back to their cars, Detective Walsh's phone rang. She answered it on speaker. "Detective Walsh? This is Agent Chen with the FBI Trafficking Unit. We've been monitoring the situation you reported. We're en route to your location, but we've got a problem." "What kind of problem?" "We just intercepted radio chatter from the local sheriff's department. Deputy Chief Morrison requested backup for a wellness check at an address on Maple Street." That's my address," David said, his voice hollow. "He's moving against your family now, Detective Walsh. Our ETA is still 4 hours, but Morrison could be at that house within minutes." David was already running toward his car. "I'm going home." "David, wait!" Detective Walsh called after him. "If you go home now, you'll be walking into a trap. My family is in that house," David shouted back. "And they'll be dead if Morrison realizes you know what he's planning. Let me call this in properly. Let me get local units there who aren't under Morrison's control." But David was already in his car, engine running. Through his windshield, he could see Detective Walsh frantically making phone calls, trying to coordinate a response that wouldn't trigger Morrison's contingency plans. As David raced through the empty morning streets toward his house, his phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. "Tell your son that some mysteries are better left unsolved. He has 5 minutes to decide if his family's safety is worth more than his curiosity." David pressed harder on the accelerator, his mind racing through possibilities. Morrison had the authority to enter their house under the guise of an official police matter. He had backup coming, which meant he could control the narrative of whatever happened there. And he had Sarah and Marcus trapped with nowhere to run. But he also had David's 15-year-old son, who had spent 3 months learning everything there was to know about Morrison's methods and patterns. Marcus might be young, but he was also the person who best understood how Morrison operated. David just hoped that knowledge would be enough to keep his family alive until help could arrive. As he turned onto Maple Street, David could see the sheriff's department vehicles already parked in front of his house. 2 patrol cars and Morrison's unmarked sedan sat in his driveway like predators waiting for prey. David parked 3 houses down and grabbed his phone, sending a quick text to Detective Walsh. "He's here, 3 vehicles, what do I do?" The response came immediately. "Do not approach, FBI en route, wait for backup." But through his front window, David could see movement inside his house. Morrison was already inside with his family, and David had no way of knowing what was happening behind those walls. His phone buzzed with one final message from the unknown number. "Your son has something that belongs to me. He has 5 minutes to give it back, or your family will become my newest disappearance case. Come inside, David. Let's discuss this like civilized people." David stared at his house, knowing that walking through that front door might be the last thing he ever did, but also knowing that his wife and son were inside with a man who had been abducting and trafficking people for years and who now had nothing left to lose. He took a deep breath, checked that his phone was recording, and started walking toward his front door. Whatever happened next, Detective Walsh and the FBI would at least have a record of it. Behind him, he could hear sirens in the distance, but whether they were friend or foe, he had no way of knowing. The front door opened before he could knock, and Deputy Chief Nathan Morrison stood in the doorway, his uniform neat and his expression calm. To anyone watching from the street, it would look like a routine police visit. "David," Morrison said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "thanks for coming home. We need to have a conversation about your son's hobby." As David stepped across the threshold, he wondered if his family would live long enough for the truth Marcus had uncovered to finally come to light. David stepped into his own living room to find Sarah and Marcus sitting on the couch, both pale but unharmed. 2 uniformed officers flanked the room, officers David didn't recognize, which meant Morrison had chosen his backup carefully. These weren't local deputies who might question his methods. "Sit down, David," Morrison said, his tone conversational but underlaid with steel. "We're having a family discussion about boundaries and consequences." David remained standing, positioning himself between Morrison and his family. "What do you want, Nathan?" "I want your son to explain where he got his information. I want to know who else he's shared it with. And I want to know how we're going to resolve this situation in a way that protects everyone's interests." Marcus looked up at his father, and David was struck by how composed his son appeared. There was fear in Marcus's eyes, but also a sharp intelligence that suggested he was thinking several steps ahead. "I told him we haven't shared the information with anyone," Marcus said quietly. "Just Detective Walsh." Morrison's smile tightened. Detective Walsh made some interesting inquiries yesterday. Phone records, financial records, property searches. The kind of inquiries that create permanent documentation. That was a mistake. The FBI is on their way, David said, hoping to buy time. No, they're not. I intercepted Detective Walsh's communications. Her request for federal assistance was redirected. As far as anyone official knows, this is a routine wellness check on a family whose teenage son has been making concerning claims about local law enforcement. David felt his heart sink. Morrison had been planning for this contingency, had contacts and resources they hadn't anticipated. The beauty of my position, Morrison continued, settling into David's favorite armchair as if he belonged there, is that I get to control the narrative. Troubled teenager makes wild accusations against respected deputy chief. Family becomes increasingly paranoid and unstable. Tragedy ensues when they resist official intervention. Sarah spoke for the first time. You can't just murder an entire family and expect people to accept your story. Can't I? I've been controlling stories in this town for 3 years, Sarah. Missing persons become runaways. Suspicious disappearances become accidents. Concerned families become grief-stricken people who eventually move away and stop asking questions. Morrison's voice remained calm, matter of fact. Your family will become another tragic example of what happens when conspiracy theories replace common sense. Marcus leaned forward slightly. What did you do with Maya Rodriguez? Morrison's attention sharpened on Marcus. Smart boy, always asking the right questions. Maya is safe, for now. Whether she stays that way depends on how cooperative your family chooses to be. She's at the mining facility, Marcus said with quiet certainty. 40 miles north of here, off Route 34. That's where you've been taking all of them. David saw one of the uniformed officers glance at Morrison with surprise, confirming that Marcus had hit the mark. Very good, Morrison said, though I'm curious how you narrowed it down to that location. Property records showed you inherited mineral rights to that area from your grandfather. County vehicle logs showed you making regular trips there outside of normal patrol areas. And satellite imagery from the past year shows recent structural modifications to one of the abandoned buildings. Morrison actually looked impressed. You really are remarkably thorough. It's almost a shame to waste such talent. You don't have to do this, David said. Nathan, I've known you for 8 years. You're not a killer. Whatever's been happening, whatever drove you to this, we can find another way. You're right, Morrison said. I'm not a killer. I'm a businessman. Do you have any idea how much money desperate people will pay for a fresh start? For a new identity, a new life, somewhere no one will ever find them? Sarah stared at him in horror. You're telling people you're helping them disappear? I'm offering a service to people who need to vanish completely. Abused women escaping violent partners. Young people aging out of foster care with nowhere to go. Immigrants facing deportation. I give them new identities, new locations, new opportunities. That's not what happened to Emma Chen, Marcus said firmly. She wasn't trying to escape anything. She was happy. She was looking forward to high school. Morrison's expression darkened. Emma was a mistake. She saw something she shouldn't have seen, asked questions she shouldn't have asked. Sometimes business decisions have to be made quickly. The casual way he dismissed a teenage girl's life made David's hands clench into fists, but he forced himself to remain calm, to think strategically. What do you want from us? David asked. I want Marcus's research files, all of them. Every copy, every backup, every piece of evidence he's compiled. In exchange, your family gets to relocate somewhere far from Millbrook. New identities, new life, no questions asked. And if we refuse, Morrison gestured to the 2 officers, then this becomes a tragedy about a family that couldn't accept help for their disturbed son. Marcus will be found with evidence of an elaborate conspiracy theory he created to deal with his mental health issues. You and Sarah will be found dead from apparent murder-suicide, a father who couldn't cope with his son's breakdown. The room fell silent as the full horror of Morrison's plan sank in. He had thought through every angle, prepared explanations for every outcome. But David noticed something Morrison had missed. Marcus was no longer looking afraid. Instead, his son was studying the 2 uniformed officers with the same analytical expression he'd worn while building his investigation board. Officer Patterson, Marcus said suddenly, addressing the younger of the 2 officers. You graduated from Millbrook High in 2016, right? You were 2 years ahead of Emma Chen. The officer blinked, clearly surprised to be addressed directly. "Yeah, I remember Emma. Terrible thing, her running away like that." "She didn't run away," Marcus said quietly. "And I think you know that. You were dating her older sister Jenny that summer, weren't you?" Morrison's expression began to shift as he realized Marcus was doing something unexpected. "Marcus," the officer said uncomfortably, "this isn't the time. Jenny told you Emma was excited about starting high school. Emma had shown Jenny the essays she was writing for Honors English, the plans she was making for joining clubs. Emma wasn't planning to run away, Officer Patterson. Someone took her." The officer glanced at Morrison, then back at Marcus. David could see doubt creeping into the young man's expression. "And Officer Williams," Marcus continued, turning to the second officer, "your nephew, Derek Phillips, was one of the missing people, wasn't he? Your sister's boy, the one who supposedly got lost hiking." Officer Williams went very still. "How do you know about Derek?" "Because Derek was your nephew, and you know he was an experienced hiker. You know he wouldn't have gotten lost on a trail he'd hiked before. You've been wondering what really happened to him." Morrison stood up abruptly. "That's enough. Officers, we need to proceed with the intervention." But neither officer moved. They were both staring at Marcus with growing understanding. "Derek contacted Deputy Chief Morrison on social media before he disappeared," Marcus continued. "Morrison offered to show him a hiking trail personally. Morrison was the last person to have contact with Derek before he vanished." "Is that true?" Officer Williams asked, his voice tight. Morrison's calm facade was cracking. "Officers, I'm giving you a direct order. Emma Chen, Derek Phillips, Tommy Kowalski, Sarah Martinez, and now Maya Rodriguez," Marcus said, his voice growing stronger. "All of them had contact with Deputy Chief Morrison before they disappeared. All of them were new to the area. All of them were classified as runaways or accidents without proper investigation." Officer Patterson was reaching for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Patterson. I need—" Morrison moved faster than David expected, lunging for Patterson's weapon. But David was ready, tackling Morrison before he could draw the gun. They crashed into the coffee table, scattering Marcus's evidence folders across the floor. "Williams, call for backup," Patterson shouted, drawing his own weapon as Morrison and David struggled on the ground. "Real backup, not Morrison's people." Sarah grabbed Marcus, pulling him behind the couch as the two men fought. Morrison was desperate now, fighting with the fury of someone who knew his carefully constructed world was collapsing. David managed to pin Morrison's arms, but the deputy chief was stronger and better trained. Morrison broke free and scrambled toward the door, clearly planning to run. He made it as far as the front porch before Detective Walsh's voice cut through the morning air. "Nathan Morrison, you're under arrest." David looked up from the living room floor to see Detective Walsh standing in his front yard with 4 FBI agents, all with weapons drawn. Behind them were 3 state police vehicles and what appeared to be half the county sheriff's department. Morrison froze on the porch, trapped between the federal agents in front of him and the officers behind him in the house. "Detective Walsh," David gasped, getting to his feet. "How did you—" "Your phone," she called back. "You left the line open when you entered the house. We heard everything Morrison said, including his confession about Emma Chen and his admission about the mining facility." As the FBI agents moved in to arrest Morrison, Detective Walsh addressed the crowd of law enforcement personnel. "We have a victim potentially held at an abandoned mining facility 40 miles north on Route 34. I need search and rescue teams mobilized immediately." Officer Williams stepped forward. "Detective, I'd like to volunteer for the search team. If my nephew might be there." "We'll find them," Detective Walsh assured him. "All of them." As Morrison was led away in handcuffs, he looked back at Marcus with something that might have been respect. "You really are remarkable," he said quietly. "You should have taken my offer." Marcus met his gaze steadily. Emma Chen deserved better than to be forgotten. They all did. 2 hours later, Sarah sat in her kitchen watching the news coverage on her laptop. The headline read, "FBI rescues trafficking victims in major Ohio operation." The reporter was standing outside what appeared to be an old mining building, with FBI and rescue personnel moving in the background. Federal agents and local law enforcement have rescued 4 individuals from what appears to have been a human trafficking operation centered in Millbrook County, the reporter was saying. The victims, including 16-year-old Maya Rodriguez, who disappeared earlier this week, were found at an abandoned mining facility following an investigation that began with tips from local residents. David joined Sarah at the kitchen table, wrapping his arms around her shoulders. They were both exhausted, but the relief was overwhelming. 4 victims, Sarah said. 4 people who get to go home to their families. Because of Marcus, David added, looking toward the living room where their son was finally sleeping on the couch, surrounded by FBI agents taking his statement and collecting his evidence. Special Agent Chen, the FBI team leader, approached their table with a cup of coffee and a folder. "Mr. and Mrs. Rodriguez," she said, sitting down across from them, "I wanted to update you on what we've found." She opened the folder to reveal photographs and documents. "Your son's investigation was remarkably accurate. We found detailed records Morrison kept of his operation, including financial transactions that confirm he was selling people to human trafficking networks across the country." Sarah felt sick. How many people? At least 11 over the past 3 years, possibly more as we continue investigating. Marcus identified 7 of them correctly. The 4 we rescued today were being held until they could be transported to other locations. "What about the others?" David asked. Emma Chen, Derek Phillips. Agent Chen's expression grew somber. "We're still investigating. Morrison isn't cooperating, but we have teams following up on leads from his records. There's reason to hope that some of the earlier victims may still be alive, held at other facilities, or sold to operations we can now track." She turned to a fresh page in her folder. "I also wanted to tell you that your son's work has opened up investigations in 3 other states. Morrison's operation was larger than we initially realized, and the patterns Marcus identified are helping us connect cases across multiple jurisdictions." David shook his head in amazement. "He's 15 years old. He's 15 years old with an extraordinary analytical mind and a deep sense of justice," Agent Chen corrected. "The FBI would like to offer Marcus a scholarship opportunity when he's ready for college. Our behavioral analysis unit could use people with his skills." Sarah laughed, the first genuine laugh she'd had in days. "I think he'd like that." Agent Chen stood to leave, then paused. "Mrs. Rodriguez, your son saved lives today. Maya Rodriguez is alive because Marcus refused to let Emma Chen be forgotten. That's not something most adults would have had the courage to pursue." After Agent Chen left, Sarah and David sat in comfortable silence, processing everything that had happened. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, as if a weight they hadn't realized they were carrying had been lifted. Marcus stirred on the couch, opening his eyes and looking around with confusion before remembering where he was. "Mom? Dad? Is it over?" Sarah went to sit beside him on the couch. "It's over, honey. Morrison's been arrested, and they found Maya and 3 other people. Everyone's safe." Marcus sat up slowly, still clearly exhausted. "What happens now?" "Now you go back to being a 15-year-old, David said, joining them on the couch. "No more investigating serial crimes. No more carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders." "But what about the other victims? What about Emma?" Sarah took her son's hand. "The FBI is handling that now. They have resources and authority that you don't have. Your part is done, Marcus. You did more than anyone could have asked or expected." Marcus nodded, finally allowing himself to look like the teenager he was instead of the detective he'd had to become. "I'm proud of you," Sarah said softly. "Not just because of what you accomplished, but because of why you did it. You saw injustice and you refused to let it stand. That's the kind of person I hope you'll always be." "Even if it gets me in trouble?" Marcus asked with a small smile. "Especially if it gets you in trouble," David said, ruffling his son's hair. "Just maybe next time trust us enough to ask for help a little sooner." Marcus leaned against his mother's shoulder, finally able to relax completely. "Deal." Outside, the news crews were packing up their equipment, and the last of the law enforcement vehicles were leaving their street. Life in Millbrook would return to normal, but it would be a different kind of normal. One where a teenage boy's refusal to accept easy answers had exposed a darkness that had been hiding in plain sight. Emma Chen's family would finally have answers. Derek Phillips's uncle would know the truth about his nephew's disappearance. Maya Rodriguez would go home to her parents instead of disappearing into a trafficking network. And Marcus Rodriguez would return to worrying about homework and friends and all the normal concerns of a 15-year-old, carrying with him the knowledge that sometimes the most important mysteries are the ones that seem too big for any one person to solve, but also carrying the knowledge that sometimes one person is exactly what it takes.